What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, this video I want to do a little bit of a historical piece, I guess. I want to talk about. I don't think I've done a video on him individually. Not really. The Chief, Robert Parish. He gets forgotten a little bit in today's NBA because like people are more predominantly fixated on perimeter players, and today's NBA is not focused on the big man. But I can remember an era where the big man played a much more relevant role in the NBA, and they were much more respected. And I think not even just with that, I love Larry Bird. Don't get me wrong, man. I think Larry Bird still is a top 5 player. Some people might rank him a little bit lower than that. But I definitely think Larry Bird is one of the greatest players in the history of the NBA. But at the same time, I think he gets too much credit, a little bit too much credit for the success for the Boston Celtics in the 1980s. He was he was the best player on that team. But you better believe that if they didn't have Robert Parish anchoring that team, they wouldn't have won any of those titles. Any of them. Okay? Without Robert Parish's contributions, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would have destroyed the Boston Celtics even more so than he did. Parish held his own against the captain. Um, you know, and his contributions led to 3 NBA titles for the Boston Celtics in the 1980s. Of course, 1981, 1984, and then in 1986. Robert Parish didn't start off with the Boston Celtics. I think a lot of people don't know too much about Robert Parish, aside from the fact that he played with the Boston Celtics and 1 year with the Bulls. I think a lot of people really kind of forgotten about Robert Parish, but he was drafted in 1976 by the Golden State Warriors. Yep, the Warriors had everybody go through that organization. And this was a down period for the Warriors. The Warriors had those great teams in the early to mid 1970s. They won the title in 1975. They swept the then Washington Bullets in the finals, if memory serves me correctly. And then the next year, they were upsetted in the conference, I think, by the Phoenix Suns in 1976. That year, they won 59 games. When Robert Parish came aboard, Rick Barry was starting to decline as a player. They were losing pieces. Some guys were retiring, and they became eventually a bad team. Now, Parish was putting up good numbers, but they weren't exactly a good team. And I think the last year that he played with the organization, they were actually a terrible team. And they kind of wanted to rebuild again. Robert Parish wasn't exactly turning the franchise around, and the Golden State Warriors were interested in a player by the name of Joe Barry Carroll. So they made a trade with the Boston Celtics. And I think if I got it correctly, with the trade, they traded Robert Parish to the Boston Celtics. And I think they gave up a pick. I think it was the number 2 pick or number 3 pick. In exchange, they got the number 1 pick. And I think the Warriors picked Joe Barry Carroll with that pick because they needed a big man because they just got rid of Robert Parish. And I know the Warriors, in hindsight, regret that trade because, look, Joe Barry Carroll was a decent player, but it was the reason why he had the nicknames Joe Barely Cares, and it was the fact that many people thought he wasn't really into the game of basketball, and his career was a disappointment. But with that pick that the Boston Celtics got, not only did they acquire Robert Parish in that trade, but they picked a guy from Minnesota by the name of Kevin McHale, who started off as a 6-man, but years later would ultimately get into the starting lineup. And that's when they had the greatest front line in NBA history: Robert Parish, Kevin McHale, and Larry Bird. And while Kevin McHale and Larry Bird did a majority of the scoring, don't get it twisted, Robert Parish could put the ball in the basket. He didn't blow you away statistically, but Parish was usually good for about, in his prime with the Celtics, about 18 points and 10, 11 rebounds per game, 2 blocks, a couple assists. You know what I'm saying? He played his role tremendously. And he was money. He was a very good offensive player. He had a very good touch, remarkable touch for a big man. And I can't remember what he shot for his career, but it was something like 52, 53% from the floor. You know what I'm saying? He had a pretty good touch from the foul line for a big man. He had range out to, I think, maybe 16, maybe feet or so, or something like that. Like I said, he was a really good player for those Boston Celtics. And some people can make the argument that the Celtics were maybe a little bit too loyal to that trio. I remember reading that Red Auerbach came really close to trading for Detlef Schrempf in exchange for Kevin McHale, but ultimately he decided to remain loyal to the organization. And those guys pretty much played out their entire careers with the Boston Celtics. Now, after Bird retired in '92 and then McHale the next year, Parish was the last remaining player from those great teams. Dennis Johnson had retired in 1990. Danny Ainge had been traded away after '88. So he went on to the Charlotte Hornets. And he actually was pretty productive with the Charlotte Hornets. And those Hornet teams were probably amongst the most popular in the NBA. People forget the mid '90s Charlotte Hornets team was probably, I think they had the hottest selling jerseys for a while in the NBA. That's the team that had uh, Larry Johnson, Alonzo Mourning, Robert Parish was on the team for a while. Well, he was actually on the team when Alonzo was there, backing him up. You had Muggsy Bogues, you had Del Curry on that team. I think, what's his name? Kendall Gill was on that team. So, that I think I want to even say Purvis Ellison might have been on that team, or was he with the Celtics? I might be getting my years mixed up with him, but those guys I named prior to him were on that team when they were a pretty good team. But ultimately, that team broke up, and Robert Parish ended his career with the Chicago Bulls in the '96-'97 season. It's kind of amazing that he was still playing. He managed to play like 43 games with the team. I think he started those 43 games, and he won to win a championship, his fourth in his career. And just before he retired, of course, Robert Parish was named to the top 50 team in 1996. When all was said and done, after his 21-year career, which at the time was the all-time record, has since been tied by Dirk Nowitzki and Kevin Willis. And of course, Vince Carter broke that record this season. But nobody most likely is going to catch Robert Parish as far as total games played. The Chief played in 1,611 games. I mean, his durability was unbelievable. The only guy that's really matching him or came close to his durability for that long was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He scored 23,300, I think, 34 points in his career. Some of his numbers are longevity based, but still, he was an all-around great player. He didn't really have any weaknesses in his game, especially for the era he played in. Like I said, statistically, he wasn't the most dominant center, but he also played around a lot of great talent, throughout his career. He played around a lot of other really good players, so he had to adjust to other players, and you've always heard the saying that less is more. When you're playing with other great players, sometimes you have to sacrifice your game for the betterment of the team, something I think James Harden needs to learn before he retires. And yes, I did sneak in James Harden somehow in this video. But that's the Chief, man. Robert Parish. I think one of the most unsung and most underrated centers in the history of professional basketball. And arguably the most durable center in the history of basketball. But tell me what you guys think.